Russia, unlike in chess, for instance, they exist only to fit Kremlin. So in chess, there are fixed rules and unpredictable results. In Russian politics, is the other way around. So the rules change, the result stays the same. I also would ask you not to look for example, for samples from Russian past, from Russian history, because the hybrid that eventually was formed after 1991 and strengthened under Putin, it's quite unique, and it definitely has some resemblance to old Russian politics. It has many components, from Mussolini corporate Italy, from Latin American juntas, from some sort of feudal relations between the central authority and the regions, but overall, it's a classical mafia. Loyalty trumps everything else. Nobody cares about what you're doing as long as you're loyal to the boss. So, by looking at the structure, I mean, we should just, probably follow one of the lines, ironically, I think, said by the Russian, the Soviet prosecutor at the Nuremberg Tribunal, when he said about actually the criminal organization taking over the state and state institution turned into the sort of extension of the criminal organization. That was said about Nazi Germany. To a certain extent, that statement describes perfectly how it works in Russia. Although, okay, we're lucky that it's not about extermination of people, it's just about, taking over the control of national treasury. But of course, they don't stop short if they see the threat to their political power and go after certain people. And in recent months, with the rise of the protest movement, you could see that Putin's regime it just shows its teeth, and it's no longer vegetarian or just simply, pushing a few people around. While we're talking about nationalism, and I want you to refer to one of the points made in the previous debate. It's about Hitler's rise to power. I think it's very, and what happens when nationalists, the radicals, take over. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, Hitler never won elections. The best result Nazis had was 38%. And the moment when Hitler was brought to power by the agreement with German ruling elite, both industrially and militarily, he was sliding in the polls. So the radical groups can win. Can get to the power only when there is an agreement between the leading elitist groups that see their own interest in bringing in supporting this radical agenda. And analyzing the Russian political spectrum, I mean, we just have to say first of all that the Russian political opposition, whether it's left, right, or liberal, you name it, for many years existed as an extension of the Kremlin political theater. So they never played a real role because they never challenged Kremlin's power. That's since 1996 when Zyuganov, conceded. So it was always, the same algorithm. We gain some political capital, we go to Kremlin, we trade it for some benefits, and that's it. Same with nationalists. The true nationalist movement, the way it exists in European countries, was never formed in Russia. There are some rogue groups, I know some of them quite well, and they get to form a true political force. For instance, the force like Populism played the same game with Kremlin, gaining political capital and trying to get a position, first in Brussels, now in the government. And it's very hard, actually, to identify the agenda of Russian nationalism because it varies quite dramatically from ultra-right-wing, so pro-Russian, ethnic, pro-religious groups, which are, by the way, are the smallest in the spectrum, to so-called national democrats who argue that Russian problems were caused by the Asian influence, and the true Russia is not the Moscow centralized state, but rather the free republics of Novgorod and Pskov. And the future of Russia is a confederation of the Russian republics integrated in Europe. So that's a very, very broad spectrum of ideas, and many of them, by the way, which is not typical for traditional Russian nationalism, they are no longer considered Russian territory of Russian Empire, the sacred element of this construction, and believe that the North Caucasus doesn't belong to Russia at all. So as it's difficult to identify the liberal left-wing groups, their exact position on many issues, same problem you are facing while dealing with nationalists. And in my view, the only danger of radical nationalist agenda being embraced in Russia comes from Kremlin. If Kremlin feels that it may fit their clandestine agenda and they can embrace it. Because Putin proved over the 30 years in power that he can wear any hat. He could sound like a liberal, he could sound like a left-wing populist, he could sound like a fascist. He doesn't care. If he thinks it works for him, and that's the classical, again, this is the mafia structure. The ideology, it's not there. And I always argue when people call Putin, Russian nationalist. He could be Russian nationalist. That could be his last resort, but it's not what he believes in it, because he believes in power, which brings more money. So it's an extremely complex picture, and I would be warning people against trying to simplify it, just saying this is the threat of nationalism, and that's why we just have to make sure that free and fair elections will not let them come into power. That's a threat that Putin has been using for a long time, inventing this threat as the justification of him destroying mechanisms, very weak, very primitive mechanisms of democracy that were formed in the 90s of Russia.
Thanks, Garry, for that interesting